Hello,
Hello,
Jay.
Jay.
I'm Jay, and let me first set up my PowerPoint. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank to the grace and mercy of God, virtue of our holy teachers, compassion of our senior masters, kind encouragement of our masters here. Thanks also to my introducer and guarantor for leading me to the way, and most importantly, thanks to everyone here. Today, I would like to explore a fascinating topic, how humans are wired. At first glance, this might seem like a scientific or abstract concept, but in reality, it has a deep connection to the teachings of Tao. Let me start by posing a question, or what does it mean to cultivate Tao? Or more specifically, why should we practice Tao? A few years ago, a master from the temple asked me this very question. At the time, I didn't have a clear answer, but her explanation left a lasting impression on me. She said, to cultivate Tao is to become the master of your mind, consciousness, and emotions. In Chinese, she said, 修道是做心的主人, where Xing refers not just to the mind, but to consciousness and emotions. Where 主人 means master or owner. What she was telling me is that a Taoist is someone who has control over their mind and emotions, to which I greatly agree with. So how can we learn to master our mind, consciousness, and emotions? To answer that, let's first look at the brain, the very place our thoughts and emotions arise. Understanding how the brain works can give us valuable insights into how we can work with it, and not just be at its mercy. So although my topic is called How Humans Are Wired, what we are exploring about is how to take control of our mind, shape our consciousness, and better manage our emotions. One model that helps explain how the brain functions is called the truant brain, developed by neuroscientist Paul MacLean. According to this model, the brain has three functional layers. The first and most ancient part of the brain is the reptilian brain. This region controls basic functions like heart rate, body temperature, balance, reflexive actions, and instincts. The next layer is the limbic system, the emotional center of the brain. It governs basic emotions and feelings such as fear, anger, pleasure, and certain aspects of behavior. Finally, the outermost layer of the brain is the neocortex, which is the most recently evolved part and is responsible for rational thinking, problem solving, decision making, and emotional regulation. These three layers are constantly interacting with each other. For example, imagine you're about to give a speech in front of an audience. You start to feel anxious because you worry about forgetting what to say or making a mistake. What happens next? Your heart starts racing, your palms sweat, and your hands might even shake. Why? Because your neocortex, the thinking part of your brain, has triggered an emotional response in your limbic system, which then influences the reptilian brain, activating the physical stress response. So this illustrates an important principle. Our thoughts can directly affect our emotions and body. But what happens if we reverse the chain? Can our body influence our thoughts and emotions? Absolutely. For instance, if you're sleep deprived, you might feel more irritable and less able to think clearly. Similarly, studies show that hunger can impair your judgment, leading you to make harsher moral decisions. From this, we can derive a simple yet crucial idea. To maintain a stable emotional state, we need a clear and rational mind, as well as a healthy body. Similarly, this means if we neglect our body or let our emotions overwhelm us, our mind will be compromised. In other words, to truly control our mind, we must also manage our emotions and our physical state. as they are all interconnected. So here's a few practical ways we can train ourselves to improve rational thinking, better manage our emotions, and maintain a healthy body. To train our neocortex and improve our rational thinking, we need to make habits that encourage clear and logical thoughts. This could be as simple as reading books, articles, watching videos, or even attending these Dao lessons. What is important is that we need to challenge our thinking, broaden our perspectives, and learn new ideas. To train our limbic system and improve our emotional management, one of the most effective techniques is practicing mindfulness, which is the ability to observe how our mind reacts to our surroundings. This is an important skill that can help us pay attention to our own emotions and understand why we may feel certain feelings in stressful situations. Other practices that could improve this could include meditation, reading and repeating scriptures to calm the mind, or simply taking time to reflect and process any thoughts you may have. As there's a famous quote by Don Dewey that says, "We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on the experience." Meaning that simply going through an experience is not enough for us to take away any meaningful learnings from it. It's not the experience itself that teaches us, but the insights we gain from reflecting on the experience. So reflection is really what allows us to turn an experience into wisdom and growth. Next, maintaining a healthy body may seem the most straightforward, but it's probably one of the hardest to maintain, as it requires consistent effort and has significant consequences if neglected. Key habits should include regular exercise, a balanced diet, and a good sleep schedule. Going further, this might include playing sports, walking regularly, eating nutrient-rich foods, and limiting junk food, etc. Now let's shift gears and talk about how to control our emotions, especially in stressful situations. I'm sure you've all experienced moments when it's hard to stay calm and think clearly under pressure. So how do we maintain emotional stability when stress is high? To answer that, let me introduce the amygdala, a small but powerful part of the limbic system that works together with our reptilian brain. Although I mentioned it briefly before, another important function of the reptilian brain is managing our instincts, or more precisely, our survival instincts. This brings me to amygdala's functional role, which is to process emotional responses, especially fear and anger. It also detects threats in our surroundings, so it can alert the reptilian brain to trigger the fight or flight response, which you might have heard of. When you're faced with danger, whether physical or psychological, the amygdala sends out signals that sends out stress hormones, like adrenaline, which prepares your body to fight, flee, or sometimes even freeze. This is a natural survival mechanism, but there's a catch. The brain isn't very good at distinguishing between real physical threats and perceived psychological threats. For example, stress from work can activate the same fight or flight response that you would experience if faced with a dangerous animal in the wild. In fact, in some studies, people have reported feeling just as much anxiety and level of stress before a job performance review or a difficult meeting with their boss as they would before a physical threat. So how do we deal with this? Let's look at a common scenario. Imagine you're driving to work, minding your own business, and suddenly another car comes in front of you without warning. How do you react? Do you feel angry, perhaps even yelling at the driver? That's probably the normal reaction. But let's take a step back and examine it. Why do we react this way? Because we felt our life was threatened. Our safety was momentarily put at risk. So our brain interprets that moment of danger, and our amygdala triggers an emotional response. But here's the key. While the danger may feel real in the moment, it's actually temporary. The intense emotion that follows, the anger, the frustration, is largely psychological. The driver didn't actually intend to harm you. It was simply an accident or a mistake. But often we are too caught up in the moment to realize that. So let's talk about the solution. The only way we can teach our brain to respond differently is by learning how to rationalize these perceived threats through elevating and transforming our mindset. Because while our brain may interpret certain situations as dangerous or threatening, the reality is they often aren't. The real issue arises when we allow these emotions to spiral out of control. If we let anger or fear overwhelm us, we risk what's called an amygdala hijack. This occurs when our emotional response takes over our rational thinking, overriding the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our logical thought and emotional regulation. This is why road rage is so common. It's a clear example of amygdala hijacking our rational thinking. But the same thing can happen in less obvious situations, where our brain mistakes a perceived threat as a real physical threat. Take, for example, a news story I once saw about two strangers on the street. One man glanced at the other as they passed, and the second man, feeling insulted, suddenly attacked them. At first, I couldn't understand why someone would react so violently to such a small thing. But now, with a better understanding of how the brain works, I realized that the man who attacked felt threatened by that glance. His brain interpreted it as a challenge, triggering an emotional overreaction that led to the irrational behavior of using violence. This is the same principle that applies to many of our daily emotional reactions. When someone criticizes or mocks us, we may feel a psychological threat targeted to our sense of self. But here's the important point to remember. That threat is often not real. It's a perception we've created in our minds. This brings us back to the various Tao teachings we've been taught, such as the concept of no self and the idea of over-attachment, as these teachings can help us achieve self-mastery through elevating and transforming our mindset. Our Grandmaster often reminds us that suffering arises from our attachment to the ego, whether it's to our image, our status, our way of thinking, or our desires. That's why when we perceive a threat to our self-ego or self-image, we react emotionally. However, if we remember that the self is fluid, constantly changing, and not fixed, we can avoid becoming attached to this fragile sense of identity. By embracing this perspective, we can stay calm and collected, even in the face of psychological threats and stressful situations, allowing us to respond with greater wisdom and resilience. To sum up, understanding how humans are wired, both biologically and psychologically, provides valuable insights into how we can master our mind, consciousness, and emotions. Where the mind, body, and emotions are deeply interconnected. And to truly cultivate Tao, we must strive to maintain balance across all three. Through methods like practicing mindfulness, challenging our thinking, and taking care of our body, we can better equip ourselves to face stressful situations with a calmer and clearer mind. To truly master our emotions in moments of pressure, we must also learn to rationalize the psychological threats we encounter in our daily lives. As Tao teaches us, by letting go of our attachment to our rigid sense of self, we can face life's challenges with greater resilience, less suffering, and a more peaceful heart. I hope this topic has been helpful, and I thank you all for listening. If I said anything wrong, I ask for master's forgiveness and guidance. Thank you.